Roller coaster enthusiasts often scoff at the word clone. Essentially, this is when the same layout is replicated at other parks. It's done primarily because it's a cost-effective way for theme parks to add new rides, as it eliminates the need to pay for a completely new design. Aside from a lack of originality, the reason us enthusiasts get sick of cloned coasters is because it's often a horrible, cheap type of ride that receives this treatment. For example, the most common clones you'll find are Vekoma's Boomerang and Suspended Looping Coaster, which are notorious for being some of the roughest and most uncomfortable rides out there. But not all clones are bad. And in this video, I want to introduce 10 popular roller coasters around the world that you might not have known were cloned. Before we dig in, don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe to Coaster Dash if you learned something new, and drop a comment if there's anything I may have missed. Alright, we're going to kickstart our list today with our number 10 spot, SheiKra at Busch Gardens Tampa in Florida. It's not often roller coasters this large and drawn out are cloned for other parks, but when SheiKra opened in 2005, it was well received for its massive drops and floorless trains. 4 years after its debut, the layout was copied for the Happy Valley chain over in China, more specifically their Shanghai location. Despite the park's impressive collection of 7 roller coasters, Diving Coaster is arguably their most popular attraction, so this clearly paid off. You'll notice with a lot of the entries in this list that the clones are located so far apart from one another that hardly anyone who isn't a coaster head would ever realize it, and that's why it makes perfect sense from a business perspective. Another great example can be seen in my 9th place ranking, Raptor, at Cedar Point in Ohio. This iconic B&M inverted coaster has taken to the sky since 1994, and according to many is one of the best inverts out there. But it was also meticulously built to dominate the park's main midway, which might be part of the reason it looks so out of place at Walligator Park in France. But that's not the whole story, as although it opened here in 2010, Raptor was originally cloned for an amusement park in Japan, Expo Land, as Orochi. Here it debuted in 1996, just 2 years after Raptor, and although it was widely considered their best attraction, it only made it 11 seasons due to a tragic accident elsewhere in the park that shut them down for good in 2007. Around the same time, Walligator was looking to install a new signature roller coaster, and it would seem they got a good deal on Orochi as they moved it over 3 years later and renamed it Monster. I actually just had the opportunity to visit this small family park as a part of my 2024 Europe tour, and in doing so, I was stoked to try a ride I knew I'd be familiar with so far from home. Unfortunately, Walligator doesn't maintain this as well as they probably should, with the ride jittering quite a lot more than Raptor and the paint peeling off more and more over time. But on the plus side, since they don't receive anywhere near as many guests as Cedar Point and probably also Expo Land in its prime, they didn't see a need to keep the mid-course brake run around, which is of course only there to increase capacity. Therefore, the second half of Monster does run slightly faster than Raptor, which is a cool fun fact for those who already love the intensity of the ride's ending elements. Number 8 is Manta at SeaWorld Orlando in Florida. In 2009, United Parks and Resorts, formerly SeaWorld Entertainment, continued to grow their Orlando location by investing in its craziest, most unique roller coaster so far. Manta would be the state's first flying coaster, built by B&M, who had perfected the craft of a roller coaster ride where the vehicles tilt riders into a prone position. It was built to make a bold first impression of guests entering the park and was designed around sections of rockwork and water features. A whole 6 years later in 2015, Japan's Nagashima Spa Land replicated the layout and plopped it down on a flat piece of land. Though Acrobat is considered a good fun coaster, those who have ridden both Manta and it tend to prefer the former, seeing as it incorporates so much theming. See, Nagashima is very much an amusement park as opposed to a themed park, so I get why they went that route, and in their defense, they did build a small pool for the ride splashdown similar to what Manta does in its second half. While there's more inventive flying coasters out there, Acrobat is still a respected attraction and considered one of the best roller coasters in the park. Number 7 is Griffon at Busch Gardens Williamsburg in Virginia. For this one, we first have to take a look back at SheiKra, which had opened just 2 years prior. Since the two Busch Gardens properties are sister parks, they often build similar coasters to one another, and in the case of Griffon, it had only a few minor differences to SheiKra. This includes an additional inversion following the second half, which acts as a turnaround on the coaster. Otherwise, it was more or less the same ride experience, so just like SheiKra, Griffon performed very well following its debut in 2007. So much so that a park in South Korea known as Jeonju World cloned the coaster. Draken is similarly a massive ride that's often overlooked in favor of other Korean coasters like T-Express and Atlantis Adventure. But from what I hear, it provides as good of a ride experience as Griffon, with the only difference being the shorter 8 across trains as opposed to 10, which makes sense given the park's attendance. What I did find interesting about this one when researching for this video is Draken opened a whole 11 years after Griffon in 2018, which is easily the biggest gap between ride openings we've discussed so far. And with how much B&M has evolved over time, I find it weird that they didn't offer to clone one of their newer dive coasters. Whatever the case, Draken looks absolutely fantastic and I think it deserves more love for sure. Number 6, Ejunaika at Fuji-Q Highland in Japan. Arguably one of the greatest, most intense roller coasters ever built, Ejunaika is a rush unlike anything else in Asia. Or is it? It was inspired by Six Flags Magic Mountain's X2, which became the world's first fourth dimension coaster in 2002, involving rotating seats through an already enormous this layout. But the ride's design and construction was so expensive that it prompted manufacturer Aerodynamics to file for bankruptcy. Later, S&S Worldwide acquired their assets and began developing a more modern iteration of X2. Enter Egenica, which actually only opened 4 years later in 2006. I wonder if Fuji-Q Highland were maybe eyeing the Aero 4D model but then waited out for the updated S&S version. Regardless, what they ended up with was an even crazier ride experience, which is saying a lot since X2 is already considered by many to be one of the world's most intense coasters. Fast forward another 6 years, and China Dinosaurs Park was looking to make a splash with a fourth dimension coaster of their own. And while not entirely a clone, I thought it qualified for this video since it's got the exact same layout. Dino Conda's key differences are that it's slightly less large, features a longer train by 1 row, and has some modifications that are supposed to result in a more comfortable ride experience. According to the few coaster enthusiasts who have ridden this and Egenica, it's as good, if not a little better, and I wanted to use my platform to get the word out since it's hardly ever talked about. Number 5 is Incredible Hulk at Universal's Islands of Adventure in Florida. Undeniably one of the world's most picturesque roller coasters, Hulk has long been considered an icon for this park and has received millions upon millions of riders since its opening in 1999. It was actually so popular that when faced with the option of closing the ride or rebuilding it from scratch in 2015, Universal took the latter option in favor of an entirely new roller coaster. But that's not where the story ends, far from it. At the end of 2021, Universal Studios Beijing opened as the company's first theme park in China. And as a signature roller coaster, they went down a route that I don't think anyone saw coming, and that's cloning Hulk. That makes this the largest gap in the video by far, more than 22 years between openings. However, with the context that B&M had retracked Hulk in 2015, it makes a little more sense that they do this, in my opinion. Still, with how much they'd evolved across more than 2 decades, again substantially more than the 11-year gap between Griffin and Draken, this did see some notable changes. Decepticoaster, though it follows the same layout as Hulk, has more drawn-out elements, eliminating some of the hardcore whip that riders had previously experienced. It also features updated trains with vest restraints as opposed to the old over-the-shoulder ones. While I can see how this could be preferred by the general public, part of what makes Hulk so good for coaster enthusiasts like myself is that it is so intense and whippy. Without that, I'm not sure Decepticoaster would be nearly as strong of a ride, but it still checks out in Universal Beijing's stacked ride lineup. Number 4, Ice Speed at Mirabilandia in Italy. Though I've been fortunate to ride nearly all major roller coasters in Europe, I've never actually gotten around to Italy, and that's a shame seeing as Ice Speed looks to be a terrific ride. Considered by many to be the country's best coaster, the 2009 Intamin launch design has a great acceleration to start and a rapid-fire blitz of elements to follow. 6 years later, the Via Development and Management Company was looking to build a new theme park outside of Istanbul, Turkey, following the success of Via Land in the heart of the city. Its signature ride, Nefeskesin, was a big hit in 2014, so they knew they wanted to hire Intamin to do something along those lines. However, since Nefeskesin is so much of a terrain coaster, there wasn't a feasible way to clone it for a park situated on flat ground. Hence, Redfire was born, still a clone, but of Ice Speed several countries away in mainland Europe. Only major difference is that VSC requested only lap bars like the ones Nefeskesin had opened with, as opposed to the uncomfortable over-the-shoulder restraints featured on Ice Speed. As a result, those who have ridden both claim Redfire is the better ride. I was actually lucky enough to experience this coaster also on my last Europe trip, and like I said, I had never done Ice Speed, so this intrigued me greatly. And I'm pleased to say it's an absolutely phenomenal coaster. Not exactly maintained the best, but in terms of pure ride experience, it's world-class and the best roller coaster in the country of Turkey. Number 3, Oblivion at Alton Towers in the UK. This is one of the most interesting stories we'll talk about today, because if you're familiar with this park, they can't build above the tree line. So why and how would they build the world's first dive coaster in 1998? Oblivion's max height of 65 feet isn't impressive in the slightest, so what Alton Towers did was they carved a massive tunnel to extend the drop a whole 115 feet. That difference doesn't register in my brain, even after experiencing the coaster last year. B&M would go on to build much more impressive dive coaster layouts, but credit where credit is due, I'm not sure any of their drops can compete with the original. Weirdly enough, at the turn of the millennium, just 2 years after the opening of Oblivion, Genfusen Fancy World in Taiwan had the idea to replicate it for their park. Only they don't have the same restrictions as Alton Tower, so the drop is completely out in the open, and the subsequent turn and brake run are elevated so high in the air that B&M needed to install these absolutely massive supports to hold them up. To me, Diving Machine G5 is one of the most peculiar roller coaster additions any park's ever made, and I can't imagine getting to see and ride it after doing Oblivion. As a result, it's a bucket list item for me personally, alongside several other fascinating coasters that call Taiwan home. For my number 2 spot, we'll remain in the UK for Stealth at Thorpe Park, which for years was the fastest roller coaster in the country. It's known for its incredible hydraulic launch, which blasts riders from 0 to 80 miles per hour in 1.8 seconds, and by some accounts, this is actually the quickest acceleration found on any roller coaster in the world. But did you know there was once a nearly identical coaster to Stealth in Japan? The now defunct Space World was an amusement park which operated from 1990 to 2018, home to what was previously one of the best coaster lineups in the country. According to many, their best attraction was Saturn, which happened to open about a month after Stealth in 2006. That makes this a different story than all the other entries on my list because Stealth wasn't replicated due to its success, but rather pure coincidence. When you look deeper, this is unsurprising as the Intamin Accelerator model is a maintenance headache for all parks that have one. But that's all this was, a headache. It's not like Saturn had reached the end of its service life or anything, so a park in Russia that goes by the name of Golden City made the move to relocate the coaster to its premises. And although the park managed to open for the first time in 2017, there's been no evidence of Saturn's reconstruction. Its track and supports remain in storage to this day, and it's unknown if it'll ever operate again. Now coming in at number 1, let's go to Germany for Terran at Phantasialand, whose layout makes for the most unexpected clone of this list. Having ridden the original coaster on numerous different occasions, I've been continuously enamored by the fact that Intamin managed to weave its 4,300 feet of track around the village of Klukheim. The buildings and rockwork elevate this coaster to a whole nother level, and without the theming, I'm not sure Terran would be anything all that special. That's why it's so strange to me that Chengdu Sunakland in China copied this coaster 5 years after Terran's opening in 2021. First, looking at the layout of All Speeds, or Extreme Speed as it might be translated, it's modified to be more drawn out and a little less intense. Very similar circumstances to how Hulk's layout was modified into Decepticoaster. Theming wise, it's visually outstanding, but they went for something completely different than Phantasialand did. I'd be so curious to try this coaster out and see how it compares to Terran, but for now, I think it's fun to nerd out over the similarities and differences it possesses, and that goes for all the coasters on this list. So I hope you all enjoyed this one. It took a lot of hard work to put together. I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.